Are you tired of your valuable ideas and suggestions getting lost in the shuffle? Well, that is why I'm introducing Direct Suggest, the revolutionary digital suggestion box that puts your voice front and center. With Direct Suggest, you have the power to make a difference in your organization. Direct Suggest provides value to organizations in various industries worldwide, including notable brands like Comcast, TD Bank, and Nokia. And here's the best part. Direct Suggest only costs 50 cents per employee per month, making it an affordable solution for businesses of all sizes. Plus, they have an incredibly high ROI and savings potential with an average 33 times return on investment. The implementation process is also a breeze. Once committed, setting up Direct Suggest from start to finish can be completed in as quickly as a week or less. Don't let your ideas or your team's ideas go unnoticed. Visit directsuggest.com today and start by making a difference with Direct Suggest. Use the promo code HUMANHR for your extended 60-day free trial. Again, visit directsuggest.com to learn more, and remember to use promo code HUMANHR for an extended free trial. Direct Suggest, where your voice matters. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another episode. If you watch on video, you'll see that over the last few weeks, I've been in a different location every single time. And this episode is coming straight from my parents' house in New Jersey. So I like to share where I am because hopefully it connects you to the podcast a little bit more deeply. And also, if you hear a dog bark, that is my parents' dog. I am dog sitting. So I apologize in advance, but hopefully he'll be on his best behavior since he's an old man now. Anyway, let's get right into the topic discussion or the episode discussion for today. I have Gianna Ricciardi on the podcast, and she's going to walk us through a topic that's really important, which is modernizing benefits. And she also has specific experience with Canadian benefits and brokers. So for those of you who are in Canada or work with the Canadian population or are interested in working with the Canadian population, this is going to be an amazing episode for you. So let me tell you a little bit about Gianna. She is the co-founder and practice leader at Vita Assure, a Canadian brokerage firm that specializes in employee benefits for small and medium-sized enterprises in Quebec and Ontario. Vita Assure works with all insurance providers, including Canada Life, Manulife Financial, Sun Life Financial, and many more, to offer thousands of their clients' employees the best group of insurance, group retirement, employee wellness, and other non-traditional employee benefits at a lower cost. Canada's workplaces are undergoing enormous transformation, and as a result, businesses must make significant employee benefit adjustments. Gianna has 20 years of experience working with the payroll, HR, and finance departments to create employee benefit plans that take into account the changing demands of the workforce. And in the past, she developed an accelerated curriculum for insurance professionals seeking certification in group insurance and published 360 Degrees of Group Insurance, a training guide on industry best practices. So, Gianna, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. I'm really glad that you are officially our resident Canadian benefits specialist on the podcast. This is something I think I might have shared with you. I've worked with Canadian populations for a number of years in the past, and Canada is so different from the US. There are so many differences. And for many people in HR, they are going to at some point interact with Canadian businesses and employees. So I would love to hear a little bit about how you kind of got started, how you broke into this industry, and what you love so much about it.
That's an interesting question, actually. I have yet in the last 20 years to find somebody who actually intentionally entered the insurance industry. A lot of times we end up kind of falling into this industry by coincidence. And that's what happened to me, like literally right out of university. I had actually studied marketing, which is, not really the same, but I ended up just meeting somebody who was a director at the time, the insurance company was called Great West Life. And I kind of just felt that it was a good fit and the environment, and I've learned so much in the past 20 years. In fact, that insurance company was probably the best school. I really feel so strongly about this industry because we get to work with so many employers, and what we do affects all of their employees and all of their family members, their spouses, their children. And so, you don't realize when you're in your day-to-day meetings the reach that you have and the recommendations you're giving. So it's really something that I kind of fell in love with and have become really passionate about.
That's amazing. And I know one of the most interesting things that you said to me when we first spoke is that you like to say that you go beyond what a broker does, and that there's this mentality behind, or not mentality, but maybe approach sometimes to benefits where it's like very maybe bureaucratic, or there is this disconnect potentially between the recipient of the benefits, or in this case, an employee, and the benefits broker. So where did that like distinguishing difference, I guess, come from for you that you wanted to kind of separate yourself from other brokers?
Yeah, well, I find that throughout the years, group insurance or employee benefits in general have started to become commoditized. So, businesses started looking at it more as a cost item on their financial statements, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to like an actual benefit that employees are going to be taking advantage of. And I guess it's because costs have really been rising significantly. Like even in when we were in like inflation periods that were like 1%, where CPI was like so low. I know that the world has changed since then, but even when inflation was so low, inflation in healthcare was double digit. So costs really have increased over the years. So I get why cost became such an important focus. But then what ended up happening is brokers were just focusing on getting quotes, and then at renewal only talking about numbers. And so when you do that, you lose the disconnect with what's really important. Why are you offering these benefits in the first place? Who's taking it, like who's going to take advantage, and what's going to be the impact on your business? Are you going to have fewer people on sick leave? Are you going to have shorter absences of sick leave? Are you going to have people who are healthier, so more productive? So I've always worked with small businesses. That was really my market. So because I was much closer, when I'm having discussions, I'm dealing with the person who's actually talking to the employee. So I'm not like, really high, like, dealing with a director that's dealing with a senior manager that's dealing with a manager that's dealing with a junior generalist. So I was very close to the discussions, and oftentimes the employees would be coming to me because I became like kind of part of the team, or I like to say an extension of the team, because small businesses don't always have big HR teams. Sometimes they don't have HR teams at all. And so just because I was so close, it really opened my eyes to the impact that the work I have has on employees. And also, I think my career development was a little bit different than maybe some other brokers. I worked for an insurance company, as I mentioned, but then I moved on to working to a consulting firm, working for a consulting firm. So we were paid like a fixed salary. We weren't paid based on commission like a lot of brokers are. And so I think sometimes that can also change your focus when you're, not to say that it's bad to work on commissions, but sometimes you need to make sure you're selling, or else you
Sure.
have no revenue, right? So
Sure.
we had a different approach. And so yeah, so that kind of affected the way that I work, and has become really an important part of our value proposition.
Wow. I am interested by this concept that you mentioned around like the connection between, or really the disconnect that can happen when there's like this focus on numbers versus the focus on who is receiving the benefits, because that is obviously the ethos of this podcast is,
Of course.
really getting back to the meat and potatoes, bringing the human back to, in this case, human resources, but in your case, back to benefits. And one of the things that you had mentioned to me is that, and I know this as well, that there's a ton of competitiveness in Canada, and benefits are important. And I think I might have mentioned this to you also. There's definitely a misconception, especially from Americans, that with Canadians, because there is universal healthcare, in terms of using this term, that benefits might not actually be necessary. But actually, for those of us who have worked with Canadian populations, we know that because of the competitiveness, businesses have really a need to offer additional benefits to their employees in order to just be as competitive as their direct competitors. So can you walk us through that a little bit, like what some of those benefits look like when at least for those, like, let's say some of the listeners have no idea that Canadians are, or like Canadian businesses at least, are at a disadvantage if they don't offer these additional benefits, and what those benefits look like.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So whenever I'm talking to or exchanging with someone that's not Canadian and we're talking about the work I do, definitely a big element of curiosity and sometimes even wonderment comes from the fact that we have public health care, right? Trying to understand, so how does that work? Like you just basically get pregnant, and then when it's time to deliver, you just walk into the hospital, and 2 days later you walk out with a baby and you don't have a bill, right? So yeah, that's kind of how it works. But there are gaps. There are gaps in the universal healthcare system, of course. So most provinces don't have any coverage or very limited coverage for prescription drugs. And we don't have, for the most part, coverage for vision care, dental care, and mental health. There's gaps in that as well. So employers really have taken the baton and filled those gaps with private insurance. So these are the coverages that are most sought out from employees who are joining businesses, who are working for companies. So that's what they're looking for. So just to put things into perspective, I would say that 60% of all healthcare claims under a group insurance plan are for prescription drugs. So that's really a big chunk of, I guess, what's missing in the healthcare system. And then, of course, I mean, just to go a little bit broader than group insurance, there's also the chunk of financial security. So building your retirement savings. This is also important benefits that are being offered by employers. And I would say that it's very rare for Canadian businesses not to offer benefits. It really is something that is sought out.
Interesting. And are those benefits attainable or like easily provided for employees by like even small businesses too, or is this really something that larger businesses are doing more?
No, it's actually quite accessible to smaller businesses as well, and there's often this myth, not only from international businesses, but even small Canadian businesses have this kind of myth where they think or they assume that they cannot have access to benefits. But there's many insurance companies that start, we have some insurance companies that start with as few as 2 employees. Then there's another, others that start with 3 employees, 5 employees, 10 employees. So there's choice out there, and availability even for a personalized plan. So sometimes people will think, oh, if I can get benefits, it's probably only these like canned products that won't be like really attractive, but it's really not true. You can personalize your plans with really small teams. And so it's really worth looking into, because it's one of the few ways that you can reward employees without any tax consequence, or less tax consequence. So it's much more financially interesting to offer somebody access to a group insurance plan than, for example, to give them additional salary.
Sure.
So even for small businesses, it could really be make a difference.
Sure, that's a really great point. And coming back to this like main topic, which is about modernizing benefits, would you say that there was a shift after COVID? Because obviously Canada was also pretty deeply affected by COVID, not only in the economy, but just in terms of how people, of course, were affected by a global pandemic and requiring or needing different benefits than maybe they needed prior. So is that part of this idea of how you modernize benefits?
I mean, yes, but not. I wouldn't attribute it only to the pandemic. I think that this issue started happening way before, like even before COVID. We were seeing concerns around chronic conditions, around mental health. But I think that COVID just accelerated maybe some of those concerns, or at least brought it more to our attention, because I think sometimes people were just shuffling things under the rug, or just kind of in denial, perhaps. So I think that me as a professional in the industry saw this mounting over many years. And I think people maybe now are more acknowledging it, or recognizing it more, I think that one thing that the pandemic did do was make people a little bit more human, because now you're dealing with employees in their homes. You're seeing their homes through the Zoom calls, and the employees are trying to also homeschool. So I think it forced people to remind people that, hey, yes, we're employees, but we're all humans too. So at least that's one of the aspects that I find it made work environments maybe a little bit more casual, you know,
Sure.
not only in the attire, but also in the approach.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when I think of modernizing benefits too, or even this idea of translating benefits into something more meaningful, which is a phrase that you'd used when we first spoke before recording, I think a lot about maternity leave, paternity leave, especially because in the United States, especially, there is definitely a disproportionate access depending on which state you live in. Like in New York and New Jersey, you get a maternity leave that is much more generous than compared to a state like Ohio that doesn't actually have paid maternity leave, let alone paternity leave. So when we think about Canada, a lot of people know this to be true, that maternity leave is 1 year. And correct me if I'm wrong. I know I'm kind of boiling this down to a very, just a simple sentence there. But in the United States, you're getting, if you get anything, you could be getting between 6 and 12 weeks, depending on what, if your company is eligible for FMLA, if your state offers paid options and things like that. So would you agree that like part of this translating benefits into something more meaningful and having a more modernized approach to benefits includes that, or is it even beyond that? Is there more?
No, that's definitely part of it, because of course when you're talking about benefits, you can look and be very tactical and look at the specific plans, but I like to think of benefits as part of the total rewards package, right? So there's many components to benefits, and parental leave, I guess, to make it more general, is an important part of that, in my opinion. So maybe this is just my opinion, but I'll throw it out there, is that I think that paternity and parental leave is a really big chunk in helping us achieve pay equity. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
explain. We've been talking so much about pay equity and how the statistics show that women for the same work earn less. And there's for sure many reasons about that. But part of that reason, what I see, is that, well, women are often forced to exit the workplace at certain parts of their career, or slow down. They cannot contribute to the same extent because they have to take on childcare, and often there's not access to affordable childcare like daycares or things like that for them to access. So they have to take a step back, and this can have an impact on their contribution. And we talked about maternity leave, which already is one thing, but what I love about what's going on in Canada is that we also have paternity leave now, and also the parental leave, which, as you mentioned, is 1 year, sometimes can exceed, can be shared between both parents. And what I found that has done is it made the conversation about the father being more involved in childcare more acceptable, right? So when it's part of the publicly funded programs, social programs, that you pay into having a paternity leave. So now the fathers are like, well, I have access to it, why not take it?
Mm-hmm.
So now there's more of first of all, they're bonding more, but also it can alleviate some of the pressure on the woman, to take the full year, because as much as some women want to take that full year to bond, there's other women who really enjoy being part of having that career, and feel that maybe they'd like to take 6 months, but get back to work, and let their spouse jump in the next 6 months, so that they can get back to their career, and they don't feel like they're coming back and like, shoot, I missed a year, and like it feels like the whole world has changed, right?
Right.
So I really love the idea of having both parents involved in parental leave. I feel that the only way to achieve pay equity is to have equity in the home. So if both parents are involved in childcare and participating actively, then both parents can also, participate in their careers and have active careers. And it's not necessarily always going to be the woman when the child's sick that's going to have to leave work early. And it's not always going to be like, I feel like certain things that we were just in the past assume, right? Like, oh, the school calls your child sick. Oh, it has to be the woman, that leaves. But I feel that that's changing. And I think that this is part of what's helping to contribute. I mean, there's so many things. Obviously, there's societal changes and influences going on, but I think that can help. I think that when you're not financially stressed to have to go back to work right away, or if a different partner can take time off, or if it's the woman that's earning more in the household, that person can get back to work and the other one can take over. I really like that idea of I guess, merging the lines between maternity, paternity, and parental.
Sure. It's interesting that you mentioned this because I did an episode in the past with the head of procurement from Logitech. His name is David Lattin. And we talked a lot about diverse supplier initiatives and how when you, as a company, pay attention to who your supplier is or how you drive equity, not only internally, but also through the purchases that you make, that you have a huge influence on culture and an environment and a country's culture, a state's culture. And one of the things that I think that we spoke about on the podcast, but we definitely spoke about regardless outside of the podcast, is this idea of parental leave being so important, to your point, to drive equity, to drive pay equity, and that when companies or the men involved, fathers, men, even before they become fathers, talk about needing those benefits, needing paternity benefits, that's where the conversation is most impactful versus a woman saying, hey, we need, more paternity benefits, because it's just a different capture of the significance. Whereas if a father or soon to be father says, this is really important to me, this is an important benefit, it does equalize and create equity, kind of to your point, within the home. Because there is definitely like this unspoken assumption when there isn't paternity leave that it's just going to be the woman taking care of or bonding with their child. And bonding is important regardless of whether it's a man or a woman. And then on the flip side of this, I'm thinking about a friend who is, at this time we're recording in 2023, but she is pregnant and her husband is not going to have any paternity leave at all. And she was saying to me that she's like really unhappy about it because all of the pressure is on her. And that is it's a very common reality, especially, I mean, around the world, but especially in the United States.
For sure. And like when we think of maternity leave, we think of like, oh, it's so nice. You're going to be bonding with your kid and you're going to have all this fun time. But I mean, there's also a lot of other things like,
like work that you've got to do. Yeah.
No, but like, it's not just, rainbows all day. It's, you're first of all, especially if you're a new mom, you might have a lot of anxiety around it. Like, am I doing this right? And, we hear about postpartum and we hear about also maybe the isolation. We don't know. Maybe that person's just home all day alone with no help. And so it's really not like, sometimes even in Canada, it's like you're off to mat leave, you reshuffle all your files and they're like, okay, it's like almost like have a nice vacation. Well, it's not really a vacation, right? It's like trying to get, produce milk, trying to deal with issues surrounding your child's health. And like there's so much to deal with. So that time really is precious, and it's really great for those that are able to have it.
Absolutely. I agree. And I really, again, I can only underline this and, enough, or I can't underline it enough, that this idea that when you focus on parental leave, there is an equity piece there. It drives pay equity because of all of those things. You put it so perfectly that a woman does leave more often. They're exiting the business, especially if they have multiple children, and they potentially are exiting the workforce completely. We saw this also in COVID, that women were exiting workforces because they were the caretakers, primarily because they earned less. And then as a result, you earn less when you do enter the workforce again, right? It's
It's
kind of
like
like
the
this
chicken
cyclical
and
issue.
egg situation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like you earn less because you're exiting because you earn less. Like,
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's just kind of one of those things where the cart comes before the horse sometimes, and then you can't figure out how you get back into the workforce. I mean, I've known so many women who have left the workforce and want to get back into the workforce. Actually, there's a great show that is kind of focused on this. It's called Younger. It's on Hulu. It's ended now, but it was a fabulous show. And it kind of, in the first season, you walk through this woman who, or you see this woman who took like 20 years off of her, career, basically to raise her children. And she was in marketing and PR, in like in the publishing world, for editing. And I think she was actually an editor, I should say. And she had a very difficult time. We go through this experience with her. She had a very difficult time getting a job because she was either overqualified or she had too big of a gap. And this show did come out before COVID, and now we know gaps are a little bit more normal in quotes. They were always normal. And basically, what she did was she lied about her age on her resume to make herself appear younger so that she could get back into the workforce. And that's like the whole premise of the show. And I'm sure that many women have been confronted with this. But anyway, that's the end of my discussion about a Hulu TV show. I do want to transition back to, again, why we're speaking today around like really making sure that benefits are speaking to employees and that they are benefits that are exciting for people, because I agree with you. I think that they can offer a lot more sometimes than what $5,000 more in a salary each year will offer. So what are some benefits that you're seeing really competitive businesses are offering today that you see as kind of like this next frontier, or being like the most competitive and the most generous with modernizing benefits?
I think it's a bit of a hard question to ask, because to answer, I should say, because for benefits to be relevant, they really have to be a reflection of your own workplace. And every business is a little bit different, right? So I always like to look at what is the employee profile, what are the challenges facing those employees. And so the answer often could be different in one business to another. So for me, modernizing is also making sure that you're not applying a cookie cutter approach to just say, this is what people offer, let's offer it. Like if the data, like nowadays we have access to so much data, right? So if the data is showing that it's an older workplace and there's so much diabetes, and that's like the common thing, well, maybe there should be some education around diet and lifestyle changes that can help, because for me, actually modernizing, a big chunk of that is education. I think that we're at a stage of, I don't want to say life, but we're at a stage where employees need to take charge of their own health. Individuals need to take charge of their own health, and employers need to provide the tools to help them take charge. So it's not just about saying, here's a group insurance plan, you use it, you don't use it, too bad. It's more about, here's some of the issues that might be facing you, Mr. or Mrs. Employee, and here's some of the things you could do about it. So education for me is a big part of it, but also tailoring, to your workforce. Like a lot of the young groups where I have, like, maybe it might be tech startups, you see a really young workforce, for them, they're really focused more on preventative things like alternative medicine, things like that. And other older workforce might be more focused on medication, but now you need to make sure, we're seeing so much, not misuse, but people not taking their medication as it's intended to be prescribed. So, are you actually following through and not missing some days of your, is there counter, like, are you taking medication that might conflict? Because sometimes people are seeing different doctors for different symptoms or different issues that they have in their health. And those doctors are not talking to each other, and they're just prescribing because
Mm-hmm.
they're prescribing based on what they're treating them for. And then what we realize is that there's actually conflicts in the medication that they're taking. So like there's a lot of, in my opinion, this is what I mean by educating, is that employees need to be empowered also to make the most of the benefits that are being offered to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even like I think about that last example, like educating a patient on what they need to share with their medical providers when they go to see them, that all of that is really, really important. If you don't share that you're taking like a blood thinner and then you're going in for surgery, like you gotta share that. That's like really important, for example. But it's definitely better not to assume that someone knows to do that, and that these educational opportunities are available as part of these benefit packages.
Definitely. And we're also seeing a lot more like small vendors that have popped up, thanks to technology. We have a big insure tech and fintech communities, which are startups that are paying more attention to healthcare and financial security.
Yeah.
And that these are vendors that we can access as complementary offerings to, let's say, maybe our main insurance vendors or main providers that can offer niche opportunities. So if you do identify an issue within your organization, or you see, maybe for you where you're really focused on mental health or wellness or whatever, we have access to a lot more variety of providers that we did, maybe 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah, I was just reflecting on like growing up and whenever my parents would talk about their benefits, it was always just very flat, like medical benefits, vision, dental, and that's all we can expect. And if they get retirement benefits, then that's an even better bonus. And I think about my experience with benefits enrollment, and in the United States, at least, like once you're 20, you can stay on your parents' benefits until you're 26, which was something that the Obama administration kind of extended. Prior, it wasn't, I can't remember what age it was, but it wasn't that way. And so when I turned 26, I was like, oh man, I have to enroll in benefits. I don't even know what this means. Like all I need are, medical, dental, vision, right? And I didn't necessarily understand the difference between like a PPO and a non PPO insurance, or what an HSA is or an FSA, and how to take advantage of different things, or if I needed like a better insurance that was more expensive, and why that could save me money in the long run versus going for something that maybe was a higher deductible insurance but cost me much less. These are things that you definitely learn over time and through experience and paying medical bills, for
Yes.
sure. But it's so interesting.
And it's really funny what you just said, because you just went through a lot of acronyms. And in Canada
Yes, I did.
also, there's a lot of acronyms. And I think that, we forget that people don't understand acronyms.
Right, right.
So it's
It's true.
important for employers to also focus
It's
on their
true.
communication, internal communication campaigns, to try to make it as simple as possible for people to understand. Don't use jargon, or try to minimize jargon.
Hmm.
Try to give examples of in what situation could this benefit be useful. For me, communication is such an important piece of the puzzle in terms of adding value. And another thing that we don't realize, I mean, maybe it's the same in the US, but in Canada and in a lot of big cities, it's very multicultural. And then, in some companies, you'll have employees that their first language is not English or not
Hmm.
French, and it makes it even more difficult for them to understand, because now you're throwing jargon into a
Right,
conversation that already they don't fully grasp the basics of the language, right?
right.
So yeah, I mean, employers should not assume it's not just young people that need to be educated. Even people who have had access to benefits for a long time might not understand. They might have been just going through the motions.
That's absolutely true. And it's a great point. And if I know I'm not the only HR professional that has had to really sit down and say, what the heck am I reading, when there isn't that, like a lot of companies don't have a broker that they're working with. Like if they're using a different, whether it's a type of HR system that has a marketplace, or at least in the United States, there are benefits marketplaces or healthcare marketplaces as well. then you're limited to the education that you're receiving unless you have someone who's specifically in a benefits position or working with a broker or both who can, really prioritize the education. So it's so true, understanding really what these benefits are. They're benefits for a reason, and they add a ton of value, especially for companies that are offsetting the cost or subsidizing the cost of benefits. That to me is like one of the greatest benefits that I can get, is if an employer is subsidizing my benefits, because then I'm going to get the best insurance that I can possibly get because of the subsidy. And obviously there is a tax benefit there. And, I think just kind of summarizing this whole discussion, I guess modernizing benefits is very specific, to your point, to the population, to the individual, to the company, and all those things. But you have to start somewhere. You have to actually start with what it is that your employees would benefit from and really are looking for, what they would appreciate the most.
Yeah, and I think also sometimes what happens in companies is that they'll do that exercise at the beginning when they're launching the plan, but then years go by,
Yeah.
and they just don't come back to it. They just assume, they're like, oh, well, we have it in place now, everything's great, right? But 10 years go by, but needs evolve. Like, listen, the pandemic showed us how much things could change in a year or two. So
Right.
it's about always going back, maybe every year, every 2 years, doing a checkpoint. Is this still relevant? Do we need to change something? That also to me is key in making sure that the benefits don't become stale.
Right. Absolutely. Gianna, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you walking us through not only the Canadian side of business and benefits, because it's so important, but also just in general, how benefits connect people to the greater mission of a company, to pay equity. I mean, all of these things really matter. So thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. And I'd love to kind of pass it to you and see if you can share where everyone can connect with you and maybe learn a little bit more.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. Really, I had a lot of fun. Anybody who's looking to connect can reach out on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easily accessible there. So I think you'll see the spelling of my name on the podcast, so
Yes.
You'll be able to look for me. There's not that many people with my name, so just go to Vita Assure, VITA Assure.com, or look for me on LinkedIn. We have a Twitter page. I mean, just go and Google and look us up, and somehow you'll find your way to us.
Amazing. And we'll link it in the show notes too. So you don't even have to you can just click the links too, and to connect with Gianna. But thank you so much again. And I too had a lot of fun. Thanks for enlightening us today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.